the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Thank you, Dr. Sarkar, for this opportunity and inviting Haley and Ulrich to be part of the sustainability seminar series. Thank you all for joining. Whenever we talk about things under the sustainability umbrella, I think one thing is clear, especially for those who you are students of the Sustainability Master's Program here. By the way, a great program, Dr. Sarkar, it's a pretty unique program. I haven't seen it in a lot of universities, so great job with that. What we find is it's not a simple, none of the sustainability challenges are simple to solve. Certainly none of the solutions are just technical, right? So what I'll showcase in my presentation today is our work with the University of Pennsylvania, helping them develop their solid waste management plan, and a collaborative approach that was used, which is where the lean comes in making it a sustainable program by involving the right people in that work. Before we start any presentation, we also do a little safety moment. So I just want to point out that there's a couple of trip hazards in the room. I'm going to be mindful of this. So the other safety moment is, I don't know how many of you drove here today, but driving, at least as an adult, is probably the most hazardous thing most of us do on a daily basis. So as you drive home today, just be very conscious of that, drive safe. Being safe is prerequisite to being sustainable. So if you're safe, maybe at least that's the first step. So be safe. My presentation today, just quickly, I'll go through some introduction slides on why UPenn took that work on in creating the solid waste management plan. I'll give you some project background. I will discuss our strategy rooted in lean principles framework, and that approach of implementing the work and the results that UPenn was able to deliver to the organization. And then if we have time, I will also try and do some lean exercise with the people in the room, maybe get you to use some lean tool and see how that works. So this was in December of 2006. 12 founding presidents of American colleges and universities got together, and they wanted to put together a high visibility effort, and they call it a climate commitment, to address global warming at the university level, because they did see university campuses as being generators of greenhouse gases. They wanted to address that as a polluter. And they also saw a big role in accelerating the research and education efforts on the higher education side. So they wanted to leverage their capacity as an educational forum to train their students better, to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. But they also wanted to walk the talk by taking on programs very actively for reducing their own carbon footprint, so to speak. This data is back from 2010. By about June of 2010, there were about 700 signatories to the climate commitment. We looked up Stevens is not a signatory. Not sure why, but I just wanted to point that out.
We brought this to the attention of our administration 2 years ago.
Okay, so
They said that they signed up.
so it's the current list as of 2017 is not showing that up, Dr. Sarkar. So you might want to check that. And just some other numbers here, which I think in the 3 years, the 600 schools did submit about 2,000 annual greenhouse gas inventories. Each of them also had climate action plans, and they were also doing progress reports. These are just numbers. I thought I'll just throw them out on the first slide. And this really was the impetus for UPenn to take on their work. Their president, Amy Gutmann, who is still the president, she signed on to the climate commitment in February 2007. It was the first Ivy League school to sign on. And as part of that commitment, they pledged that Penn will develop a far-reaching plan to reduce campus greenhouse gases. And their long-term goal is really to be climate neutral. As part of that commitment, they created Climate Action Plan 1.0 in 2009, and that was a 5-year plan, and their Climate Action Plan 2.0 was updated in 2014, and that goes through 2019. And you can find this information on their website if you're interested, so I have put that link in here. So and our work that I'm going to present on today was done between 1.0 and 2.0. So it's between 2010 and 2014 timeframe. So the Climate Action Plan 1.0, the key recommendations from the university with regards to that plan was they really as part of that plan, they identified components needed for waste minimization and recycling. So it was a lot about solid waste, because university, and you might see this in your own campus, you guys generate a lot of trash, right? So it is about managing that in a way that's sustainable. They also realized that they needed campus-wide communication feedback involving the stakeholders and having a waste management working group. They also had specific recommendations for awareness and education with respect to not just the students and the faculty, but also with housekeeping. So this sort of was the overarching recommendations from the Climate Action Plan. And as part of that plan, solid waste management was identified as a key component. And their facilities and real estate services group, called FRES for short, because facilities, and I don't know how it's with Stevens, but facilities really are the ones that would take the lead in this, because solid waste would be under there. So they issued a request for proposal that went out.
It's the same thing here, we have a sustainability committee which is led by the VP of Facilities.
Exactly, so it's not any different. So they issued an RFP, and we became involved with that work after winning that proposal. So the way the RFP was set out, their overarching project objectives for the solid waste management plan was to align with the Climate Action Plan, of course. There are 6 main things that they wanted to achieve or set out that the project to achieve. One was to increase the waste diversion rate. And what that really means is getting the waste and getting it more to be recycled or composted, like you were just saying. So that's what's called the waste diversion rate. So getting more of it, out of the landfill. Second big component for them for the solid waste management plan was that it needed to have cooperation and participation across the campus, not a certain school or not a certain, they really wanted it across the board. They wanted, as a research school and an engineering school, wanted to be able to pilot some new technologies and sustainability practices. They wanted to increase the efficiency and ease of their own waste management systems. And the next two are actually more overarching and long-term. FRES, as part of this initiative, also they saw that by doing this, they would be operating really at the highest level and really serving the organization really well. So that was their goal in doing this. And the overarching goal was to work towards a zero carbon footprint by 2042. So now I'll move into the strategy and lean principles and how that informed our approach for the project. Before I move on, how many of you have heard the term lean principles? How many of you have heard of Toyota? So this Toyota, lean really comes from Toyota's manufacturing. Back after World War II, Toyota really took on streamlining their assembly lines, and lean was a way they did it. It's a way of error-proofing and making processes more efficient. And since then, it's really been recognized that lean principles can help you really improve any process or product. And I'll speak to it about how that's done. So it really has taken the manufacturing principles of lean and applied them to services. We actually, as a consulting firm, are applying those in our daily work for our client. And it really does improve the results. And I believe that application of lean is what really helped build the solid waste management plan and made it a better product for Penn. So what we really did is, typically so this is sort of management consulting, but a little bit better. So let's say a management consulting firm had won this project. They might just come in, they might look at you, they'll go back and give you a package of report and say, we know what the problem is, here's your solution, implement this, right? Our approach was based on facilitating representatives and workers and students and faculty. Together with that, we brought on our waste management experts. So it was this facilitation combined with our technical, so we call it our secret sauce. It's better than, better than just being management consulting and better than just being technical. So combining those two, really working with the staff and the stakeholders for their ideas. And what we felt and shared with Penn is this would go really a long way in not just improving the collaboration, which was the guiding principle for Penn. They really wanted this to be a very collaborative process, but that it would really bring in systems thinking into the process. It would make the process very visible because it wasn't us doing this work in a black box and then coming to you, but it will be built together. We would use rigorous tools. We would find hidden resources. So anytime you take on an initiative, it costs money, right? So where is UPenn going to find money to do what so we would find resources in their current processes so that they could apply towards this program. And it might not only just apply to those programs, but actually might lead to cost savings in the overall waste management. And then we would also be able to come up with metrics that they can actually, measure their progress against. Because ultimately that's important for Penn to show that this initiative did lead them some, return on their investment. So why lean? Lean is, like I mentioned, it comes from manufacturing. If you took anything away from this class today or seminar, I would want you to remember this particular slide. It's about value, waste, and people. In terms of value, use of lean tools and principles really allows you to deeply understand who your customer of that particular process is. So understanding your customer and knowing and getting clarification on what their value is. So increasing the value of the process, reducing waste. And when I say waste, I don't mean trash. Waste in concept of lean means removing things that get in your way, right? So taking away the obstacles, taking away the constraints. So why is there recycling in a trash bin, right? Asking that question and understanding the process of how the trash ended up in a recycling bin so that you can remove the constraints and obstacles that make it happen that way, because that's, I think somebody I was talking to earlier mentioned about not having enough recycle cycling containers at Stevens. And so it's looking at the process in that way and coming up with the right process to remove those obstacles. And this, I think, is the most important part, is the respect for people, which goes back to the facilitation part. And the respect for people is showcased in lean approach by acknowledging that the people that are closest to the work know how best to do the work. That means they also know how best to improve the work and make it better. So not saying that the janitor doesn't know what they're going to do, what we tell them to. Well, if you just take that approach, they might not join you in that goal of yours, right? If you understand what, and they might actually have better ideas than any of us in the room on how to make the process better. So it's really understanding and acknowledging that the people that are closest to the work have the best ability to make it better. So those are the 3 core lean principles that if you had to take something out of this class, take this. What lean also does is it takes non-standard information and process and tries to bring it together in a standardized, optimized approach. And this needed to be done because what we knew that, Penn, being a big campus with various schools and residential halls and centers, each of them would have their own way of doing things. And what we wanted to do is learn the best practices and make it a consistent one standard approach. So using of lean tools, helped us do that. It basically allows you to see and understand in a better way. We can make things visible so you can actually really work towards improving and achieving. So the fact that Penn I'm going back, I have a couple of more slides on value because it's so important. Because, let's say Penn had these goals, great, right? How are they going to achieve these goals? These could only be achieved if they linked what people valued, means the people that it affected, whether it's the students, housekeepers, facility, if they could link the value to these folks to the goal, right? So people had to see how would they incentivize. So linking the value to the goal was important. And I have a cartoon here, and usually this is animated. Vishwa told me not to animate for the, because I think it's hard on the webcast. But typically when you ask somebody what they value, so in this case, this is a cartoon of a customer wanting like a tire swing. Sometimes customers themselves don't know what they want. They explain it in a different way. So you have a little swing here, how the project leader understood it, how the analyst designed it, how the programmer, it's a funny cartoon, how the project was documented, basically, there's a clear sky over there, how it was installed, how they were built, and then what the customer really wanted. So how do you get to that value of really understanding the customer? And that's what the process of lean does. It brings people in the room, getting them to talk. And what you have to realize is, in most cases, there's not a single customer, right? There's multiple customers. So what you have to do is not only just talk about the individual customers, but actually build consensus so they understand each other and where differences might be and where things need, who has priority, so that nobody feels that, they have not been considered. But you have to get towards moving towards a consensus. So in the work for Penn, this is a slide on what top customers the group identified. So as you can see, their parents and what their value is on this other column. So parents who are paying for the Penn education, they certainly want the campus to look good. They want the value of the Penn education that they are spending money on. They want areas to be clean. The residents, somebody actually had an anecdote that when food gets delivered or catered, there's really no system of that getting disposed of. So then there has been situations where there would be rats, and certainly that's residents wouldn't want that. So they really want clean space. They want timely trash pickup. They want clean buildings. On the lab side, they're using some unusual materials, so they really want to know what the process is for disposal. They want to do the right thing. Athletics cares about presentable facilities and regular service. Students, of course, being they care about the environmental impact. You guys are the future. They care about the social responsibility. They want to do the right thing. But if you don't know and you're not aware, and if there's no process, it basically doesn't allow you to do the right thing. So they were very much interested in knowing about actually wanting to see data. They wanted to see the trash recycled. They wanted clear communication. They wanted assistance in being better citizens. So those are the values that came. And all of these groups were represented and in the room when we did the work with them. And building administration staff and research faculty, had their own values. So we brought groups of these people together. And throughout the work, we kept these values up front in the room, so that we could align all of our work towards these values. So our approach, and with Lean, you will see this, and you might have seen this graphic in other places too. Plan, do, check, adjust. You plan the work, you start doing the work, and then as things change, you have the ability to check and adjust. So it's a continuous loop. So our project planning really initially started with understanding current state. And current state is a terminology that's common in Lean. It means exactly what it says. It's basically understanding how things are done right now. Because sometimes people tend to move very quickly into solutions, especially scientists and engineers. You give them a problem, they want to solve it, they want to figure it out. But they don't spend or stew time on understanding why is the situation, why it is like it is today. But if you don't do that, sometimes what happens is you focus on the symptoms as opposed to the root causes. So understanding why certain things are the way, it will get you a better understanding of problems and obstacles. So we spend quite a bit of time on understanding current state. And the way we did that, and I have a couple more slides with details on each of these, is we had a pretty large group kickoff meeting where all the groups were represented. We did interviews, we mapped the current state, and then we summarized the obstacles. I have detailed slides on each of these. So the kickoff meeting included people from FRES, including supervisors and managers. It included people from design and construction group. It included their directors of buildings and centers. We had representation from most school centers, the central sustainability group, the coordinators for each of the buildings, dining services, purchasing, building administrators, and housekeeping. And the purpose of the kickoff meeting before we went and started the work was for them to see how important it was, this project was important to Penn, but more importantly for them to see how their input was critical, that they saw this as something they were doing collaboratively with us as opposed to something that we were doing to them. So it's not something that I'm coming in saying that this is the thing, this is what you need to follow, but something that we were building together with them. So having that distinction being made clear to them in kickoff meeting actually brought them on board quickly, and then they were much more receptive to our questions, and they knew that it was an open and honest environment and that they could speak freely, because what we really wanted to get to was really understanding what goes on in a waste stream once the garbage is generated. We did like 15 hours of interview with 11 groups, and the other thing we did in Lean, which has roots in Japan, there's a lot of Japanese terminology gets used. I've tried not to use a lot of it here, but Gemba is something that I did want to talk about. Gemba is going to the place the work happens to see what actually happens, so that you're not sitting in the office and just assuming that things are this way. You actually go and see. So we did a lot of observations with our staff to actually go and see, okay, what's the solid waste management look like at Penn? And Penn's a big campus, but there were actually 110 different types of bins across the campus. There were 35 different signs across campus with respect to the bins usage. In one school which had 42 bins that were 50% full, 88% of it was cross-contaminated, which means that there was recycling in the trash bins and there was trash in the recycling bin. So at that point, you can't really send any of that to recycling. All of it is going as trash. And in another school center where there were 16 bins that were 50% full, the number actually went up high, and we figured that it was, if the numbers of bins were less, the likelihood of them getting cross-contaminated was larger because, you know, if people didn't have place to put the trash or recycling, they would just get mixed up. And these are just some pictures from that effort. Yes.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
The one. Yeah. From this, I take it that they have a sustainability office in Penn?
Yes.
When you call them central sustainability?
They do have a central sustainability office.
There are several coordinators?
That's correct.
And,
yes.
With them being there, when you pointed out like all that stuff mixed up, how did they take it?
You know, they were, I think there was no finger pointing that it's somehow your fault. So I think they took it in the right spirit of the project, that we were there to, you know, take observations so that we could make recommendations. In fact, they arranged for us to, the people that maybe took it, that we expected to take it the worst was the housekeeping, you know, because they're so involved in actually doing the work. Yeah, so that might have been a challenge, but I think and I think that was the purpose of the kickoff meeting, so that people understood that we were not pointing fingers. This is to learn and, you know, come up with a plan. Yes.
At this kickoff meeting, did you talk about potential solutions, or was it really just pinpointing the problem?
No solutions at that time, because, you know, we really wanted people to understand what the approach was, what our plan was, and then that solutions would emerge actually from them, and you'll see that. Yeah. So after the meetings and the interviews, we actually got with again representatives from each of those groups and mapped the current state out. And this is a map. We actually do it live with Post-its so that everybody feels heard. So it's not. So let's say if there's a director in the room, the housekeeping staff might feel that they can't speak up. But when you make people write and post their thoughts, you know, everybody gets a voice. So this is a way of getting, people's opinions and thoughts. And then in Lean, again, this is a visual coding. Pink is for problems. So here you have they identified 71 problems in the waste management stream. This is, again, another Lean tool we used. It's called impact difficulty. So after all the problems were identified, we talked about which of the problems, so rate the problems according to the impact they would have on the improvement of solid waste management program if they were solved. So this lower quadrant here is low difficulty, low impact. What you want to focus on is this upper left corner, because that's your low difficulty, high impact. So as you can see, there was a bunch of those. But and then again, you really want to tackle things that have high impact. So this was a way of prioritizing, because anytime you take on what I deem as an adaptive challenge, I mean, if you go in with the mindset that you're going to go solve every problem, likelihood is you're going to fail because you have just taken on too much. So you really have to work either as a phased approach, or you really have to prioritize your actions so that you may have the incremental improvements, see the results, and that gives you the mindset to continue. Because if you just try to move that mountain in one go, it's going to be hard. And then this, this makes it very systematic and open, so you're not somebody just sitting in a room deciding this is the people that are impacted doing the work. So out of all that work, some problem themes emerged. And one thing you'll see is that this is not rocket science. I mean, somebody could sit in a room and come up with this, maybe. But this came from them. This is their problems, that themes. So one was that this realization that the housekeeping generally, there was more training needed. There was lack of knowledge and communication, and it wasn't housekeeping's fault. It was that there was no program under which they could have been taught or trained. Right? There was no program at that point. There was a very decentralized structure of waste management. So every center and every school was sort of doing its own thing, right? And the whole paper towel. I don't know whether Stevens uses electronic or air or paper towel, but they wanted to keep their paper towels, and they also wanted to compost them, but they didn't know what the process was, and housekeeping was not on board because I think their process for collecting paper for composting was very complicated. So there was a whole, an hour or more discussion on paper towels. There was this realization that, design and construction projects also generate a lot of C&D debris, right? There's a lot of waste that gets generated, but there's really no proactive planning around how that is going to be managed. So there was a need to make that part of the solid waste management plan. And then, the lack of recycling containers and the lack of process on e-waste. So these were just sort of like major problem themes that emerged, and there'll be a few more slides on those as well. So that, based on all of that data, we created sort of these affinity grouping of key areas for improvement, and those were these 6, and I have slides on each of those. So communication, materials management, housekeeping processes, tracking of the data itself, vendors, especially food vendors, and then e-waste. So each of these I have on slides. So on communication, these were like, again, I'm summarizing, 6 months worth of work, but these sort of were the main areas of improvement that emerged. That on the loading docks, there's like lack of instructions or signage, and then waste management materials this is so when trash gets picked up, right, that they're not separated. So the guy who's picking up the trash, he's just going to, if recycling bin is sitting in the space of where the trash is, he's just going to load it in his truck. So not having proper areas and distinct areas, that was causing possibly a lot of recycling to go into trash. Signage was very inconsistent or not present across campus. And then there was, of course, still Penn had taken on this program. There was really lack of education, and nobody really understood the importance of waste management and doing it in a streamlined, effective way. And also realizing that how that is really a big part of sustainability for Penn as a campus. Because we think of trash as trash, and maybe we do a little bit recycling, but there's really no systematic thought to thinking of waste management as a big component of your carbon footprint. On the materials management side, the whole issue of bags, barrels, and bins. Like I mentioned, there was 110 different type of bins, 35 types of signage, not appropriate number of bins being there. This was a big one, no centralized control over purchasing. People had actually purchased their own, people who wanted to do recycling had made their own recycling baskets. But the person that was picking up the trash, if he or she didn't know that was recycling, it was trash. So not having that centralized control, the fact that there were no standard vendors that each school could go to. There was no standard operating procedures for purchasing and recycling of construction materials. And really, during the building construction, there was really no proactive system in place to consider space, flow, and functionality of waste management stream. buildings were being built for people to live or people to study, but waste management was not a proactive consideration. So the idea was to maybe change that as part of the design and consider that so that it could be effective. On the housekeeping processes side, the housekeeping staff was just putting whatever bags they could find within the bins, and it wouldn't match how things were supposed to be done. They were challenged in transporting the waste from one location to another. They did find that recycling had increased because students wanted to recycle, but it actually really increased the demand for removal because they were servicing 168 buildings. So it showed that there was a resource constraint, and that's something that Lean does is it opens up perspectives that people might not see. So a building facility might not have seen that as a constraint, but the fact that the housekeeping staff was overstretched sort of came out as a result of these conversations. And then there was really no effective way of disseminating information to the housekeepers. The other point that came out was the housekeepers didn't really know how much control they had about what they could do because they were tied by contracts and unions. So those were the 5 major areas related to housekeeping. They really were not tracking any data, and none of the stakeholders really knew about or thought that Penn had any waste management process. And then the whole issue of how are we even going to collect this data. So that came out as a constraint in working through this process. On the vendor side, again, food vendors, they didn't know, or even if they knew, they didn't do what was needed. And they really were not incentivized or didn't have the resources needed to support Penn's overall waste management goals. With regards to e-waste, standard processes did not exist. One realization was that Penn didn't really leverage their buying power as an institution to use economies of scale in purchasing and then in disposing of electronics. So the fact that everybody was doing their own thing, they were not really leveraging their power that they could really use, and no standard communication around how to handle e-waste. So this was just current state, right? This is all the problems. We stewed on that for a while, and then we sprung from that into what's called a future state workshop. It's, how would you like things to be? So you map that and you look at where you are now and where you want to go and do a gap analysis, right? And then you look at the problems that you have identified that if you solve them are going to have the most impact. And with that, you prioritize your solutions. So it's sort of, you see how that, the current state sort of feeds into the future state. Now think if we straight away went to future state, I mean, you wouldn't get to half the understanding or even less, right, of really knowing what the problems were and what you needed to fix, because you would be moving too quickly into solving the problem. So let me just actually stay on this slide for a second. So they actually generated 110 ideas, and I just noticed that coincidentally it's the same number as the bins, but that's just a coincidence. It's 110 ideas. They didn't all go in the garbage, no. They did the same prioritization of ideas based on values and impact. They also field tested some ideas, and then we actually developed action plans and metrics. And my next slide is on metrics. One of the metrics was to increase the waste diversion rate, which I mentioned. And this they would measure by % of diversion rate, so how much was going to landfill versus being recycled or composted. The other goal was to encourage cooperation and participation across campus, and that they were going to measure by looking at non-contaminated bins across the campus, and then also consistency of signage. Because for each of these, I think it was important to come up with some simple metrics that we could follow and they could follow going forward. And then increasing the efficiency and ease of Penn's waste management system. And again, that was tied to the recycling rates and number of cluster bins. And cluster bins here really means is at a place where you have a, if it's a spot for somebody to throw trash, that each of those places you also have a recycling. Because when a person wants to throw something, they're going to throw something whether, in whatever bin is available. So giving the option to be able to segregate was important. So the increasing percent of cluster bins was a goal as well. So this ended up, all of those recommendations ended up in the solid waste management plan, which Helion already drafted for UPenn. And it has two major components. One was for the working group efforts, which were going to be tied to the entire campus and the consistency and streamlining across the campus. And then there were specific recommendations for the individual schools and centers as well. And both of those components went into the plan. So just as an example, for the working group, which was looking at the entire campus, there were 30 recommendations that were, again, phased out so that they could see results from early successes. And these are just few of them. One was to develop and publish a standard set of recycling guidelines, improving and increasing signage. We also wanted, one of the recommendations that came from them was to incentivize the housekeeping group by having some sort of like recognition program. And then also putting meters on trucks. This is for weighing, their trash versus recycling, so that it could be actually remotely reported, and right away they would have the data on it. So this goes to the data collection part. On the individual school and center side, this again, there were many, but this is just one example. There were again 3 checklists that were given to the schools. Checklists always make it easy for people to follow, and those checklists were developed after doing all the work. So, they were pretty comprehensive and robust and had input from all the groups. And there were simple things like making sure all bins are in pairs, that as I just mentioned before, ensure that color coding is consistent, having a centralized vendor for buying the bins. And then incentivizing and really making the housekeeping supervisors accountable for bag colors. So simple things, but again, things that had a great impact on the overall program. Quickly into the implementation side of things, the plan included the working group met once every 2 weeks. They field tested and piloted some of the programs. So for example, they might have done bin groups in certain locations and not at certain locations. And then they found that the ones that did have the grouping remained uncontaminated versus ones that didn't have the, were. So, field testing that will the recommendations actually work. And we also did rapid improvement workshops with some very tangible actions. So, bin pairings, where were they needed? Simple one-page document for color coding system. And this is, a lot of it is actually on Penn's website that you can find. Created a list of 6 acceptable bins, so to standardize across the university. And then also, because again, we want to do the PDCA, plan, do, check, adjust, also giving the opportunity to provide feedback, whether it was from housekeepers or students, about how, if somebody had a suggestion to make the process better. On the food vendor side, Penn actually got involved and developed a list of commercially acceptable recyclable materials. They created a list of required and preferred practices for removal of waste from the trucks, and then again developed one-page document. So they brought the vendors along because that's where a lot of waste is generated. They drafted an announcement and for their goal of having zero waste events. These are large events that or small events that happen within the university. And they did that by developing the checklist for staff that was managing the event to how to go about having a zero waste. They also provided additional support to the groups, and as with any university, I think they had a lot of events where there were like box lunches and catering, and then how to reduce that waste, maybe using less of box lunch type of lunches, but maybe more platters or things like that. It's again simple. But more importantly, what came out of the whole process in doing this work is the conversation started happening, and then just by the conversation happening and the discussion and the work, it created the awareness that this was important for Penn, and students were more than happy to sort of like join in and do the work, and it got the schools and centers to work together, and including the housekeepers and student in the conversation, really made it their project or their initiative as opposed to something that was being done to them. They felt part of the process, and they felt that it was so there was really no learning time loss because they were already like behind it. There was no resistance from, I wouldn't say there was no resistance, but it was a sort of an easier, it was a molehill as opposed to being a mountain of resistance. Key accomplishments, training events, they had a new web page, signage and pictograms, standard operating procedures. They expanded their composting program. They had a lot of zero waste events following the publication of the solid waste management plan. Scales on trucks. So these are just the interim accomplishments. And then this is actually right from their website. When I did the slides, I found them. They actually diverted 400 tons of construction debris since 2000. So this is recent data. And 15 tons of compost has been diverted per month from Penn dining cafes. So this is stuff that would have gone to trash, but it's now being diverted for recycling. And then there's 13% decrease in total waste produced. And so that's on the waste minimization and recycling, and then outreach and engagement. There's 751 staff and faculty that are working in 83 certified green offices. And then the fact that 9 of 12 Penn schools have designated a sustainability coordinator to work toward a climate action plan 2.0 goals, which they did publish in 2014. So I think good results and good outcomes. So the takeaway message is that so we created a solid waste management plan through this collaborative process, and I think what it is that engagement with those who were directly involved has actually made the plan itself sustainable. Like they have a process to now plan, check and adjust, and continue to make improvement, but the plan wouldn't have been as strong if somebody else was just coming from outside and saying, this is what we want to do. So the process and using the lean approach really created that collaboration. This is just some feedback, the fact that it was tailored to Penn. And this is where I was talking about perspective. This came from, I think, a director. He said he was shocked to find out how complicated things are. I think when you are outside, you think of things as simple. So it opened up people's eyes on how complicated things are. The fact that we had different schools and departments represented was a big part of, and this allowed people to bring like if the different sustainability coordinators are talking to each other, it makes it easier for them to learn from each other and actually have some best management practices. So overall, they were pretty happy with the process.